Naší další hostkou bude Amy Davies. Ta prezentace její a celý ten blog bude v angličtině, takže samozřejmě poprosím i případné dotazy v angličtině, kdo by měl problém s jazykem. Máme tu překladatelku, tlumočnici, která případně nám může pomoct, ale doufám, že to zvládneme sami. Amy Davies je viceprezidentkou pro strategii a kreativitu ve společnosti Vice Media, což je největší nezávislá mediální organizace pro mládež ve světě. Jejím úkolem této organizace je propojovat značky s publikem a s tím ekosystémem Vice. Tak v tuhle chvíli poprosím Amy sem na jeviště. So please come on the stage, Amy. Take the mic and stage is yours.
Hello everyone. Just check this is all okay. Hello. So thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about Generation Z. Just to give you a bit of background on myself. So I became really interested in next generations when I was doing my master's. I did that in strategic foresight and innovation. So looking at what's next. And I was originally going to do my topic on machine learning, AI, where that's going to take us. And then, of course, in my fourth year, I actually got pregnant and I had my first child, Una, and I started to look at this little being and I thought, my God, she's coming into this world of social media. She doesn't even know it yet, but she's got images all over the internet that I've already put up there. You know, what are the implications for this young being? So I actually did my thesis looking at the implications of social media on younger generations. And then I decided to take a job at Vice Media Group, which, if you don't know Vice, we're a media publisher, and we're specifically talking to young audiences, so Gen Z and millennials, and we cover everything from ID to Refinery 29, etc. So Vice Insights is the internal research and intelligence arm of Vice. So we look at young generations daily. We do it in 3 ways. So the data that you're going to see, I am going to give you some data myself as well. I'm not a statistician, but I certainly am a researcher. So the data that you're going to see is drawn from our proprietary methodologies. So we talk to 40,000 youth globally, and I'm going to bring Gen Z data here. So that's older Gen Z, though. So the point earlier, we're talking to kind of 17 to 24, 26. And we also talk to our internal cultural insiders, if you like, so the people that are running Noisy, our music channel, the people that are running ID, our fashion channel, because to another point that was raised in the earlier session, Gen Z are embedded and wedded in culture. So we want to understand how these cultural spaces are moving forward. And then, of course, we look at our content analytics. So I can look at what topics are trending amongst young people on our Refinery 29 channel, for example. And we cover all different topics. Everything from what is the future of gaming and the metaverse to, you know, what is the future of feminism. And by the way, I'm always happy to share any of these research reports with anyone in the room. Please do speak to me afterwards if you'd like to look at them. So before we dive into 4 core areas that I've brought to discuss today, I just want to think a little bit about the context that surrounds Gen Z, because I think it's really important to ground your understanding, because we are all products of our context. So if you think of millennials, I'm judging it's mainly millennials in this room, maybe a little bit older. Are there any Gen Zs in the room? Okay. Oh, thank you. You can refute me if I get facts wrong, please. You too. I'm looking at you now. So millennials, like myself. We were born in political stability. There was a financial crash, obviously social media boom at the time. It was the social media heyday. We had the cult of the entrepreneur, so we're politically apathetic, hedonistic. We had our life on broadcast at the time. There was a strong influencer culture, very entrepreneurial and perfection chasing, but not so for Gen Z. They were born into political instability. We're in a financial recovery and crash again. And we started to face social media reckoning. So this cohort is politically engaged. They are financially careful. They live their life judiciously online. They're curating their presence. They want a work-life balance, and they value self-exploration. And dominant cultural narratives are shaping their worldviews, and equally, they're shaping our dominant cultural narratives. So at Vice Media Group, we think of these whenever we're creating our content for younger generations, we call them culture codes. So I'm just going to high level talk about 6. The first is new codes of wealth. So there's been a change in value around what we consider and expect from those who are wealthy. So think about the eat the rich narratives that are all around us right now. Triangle of sadness, the menu, right? It's not acceptable to just amass wealth and not give back anymore. We've seen a shift from valuing the Jeff Bezos to valuing the Patagonia founder, to actually valuing sports stars like a Marcus Rashford in the UK, for example, who do something more with their wealth. They give back to society. Know thyself. Mental health and wellness is absolutely acceptable for younger generations, right? You're allowed to express your mental health challenges. There is a new openness around that didn't exist from previous generations. And again, you can see it all around culture. If you think about Netflix viewing, we've got shows like couples therapy, sex education and wellness, all new shows that actually allow you to look inward. And for young generations, for Gen Z, they're actually paying to go to therapy. That is a normalized pursuit. Neo-hedonism. Pleasure for older generations and hedonism used to be considered something that you paid for. Thank you. Can you tell I need a drink? So neo-hedonism. So pleasure used to be something that you waited for, that you paid for, right? You'd have to work through 5 days a week, and then if you were lucky on the weekend, you'd be able to embrace that pleasure, you'd be able to embrace those hedonistic pursuits. And they were often imbued with a disfortune to yourself. So if you went out on the weekend, you might pay for it financially, you might pay for it with a hangover, but that's not so for younger generations, right? Pleasure is something that they look for in everyday life, and they've expanded the lexicon of pleasure pursuits because of that, right? When you think about pleasure for young generations, there is now a work-life balance. There is now taking moments of pleasure just to go outside and look at the beautiful, leaves that are on the ground. There is also kind of viral videos, like if you fans of TikTok, like it's a chicken salad. Just a simple video, it's like, it's a chicken salad. It's great and I love it, and that's just a damn simple pleasure that I'm going to embrace. So we ask ourselves daily, how do we give younger generations access to everyday pleasure in their lives instead of making it seem like something that they need to wait for or pay for? Local seeds we think about. And I'm going to talk about this in a moment when I dive into the 4. Because of COVID, because of the pandemic, there was a gravitational pull to community, to local, to wanting to feel belonging again. There was a tangible movement, right? People actually left big cities, especially among younger generations. They've been living and working from more urban environments and then traveling in. We have actually gravitated to more shows that are based on local communities. Again, if you look at Netflix, there's Virgin River. I don't know if you look at that. You've probably got different show references here. You'll have to share some of yours with me. Surreal worlds. You've probably talked about this earlier, but the language of Gen Z is in videos, is in images. It's not in text like previous generations. And they're memifying their life in this world of surrealism. And again, that is in response to the very turbulent times that are happening around us. And we've seen a gravitational movement towards surrealism amongst younger generations, towards the memification of their lives, but also towards things like tarot reading, spirituality, mystic learning, etc. And then the 6th cultural bucket, if you like, that we think about is the rise of the anti-hero. Very recently, we have seen a resurgence of this anti-hero archetype. If you look back at shows that used to be predominant in culture, there was a heroic character, polished perfection. We gravitated to them, but not so for younger generations, right? You've got shows like Fleabag. You've got shows like Deadpool. You've got shows like Euphoria. These are all showing anti-heroes. These are flawed characters that are morally ambiguous, but we gravitate towards them because we're allowing more empathy into our lives. So just look at value structures at a glance. So Gen Z versus millennials. Millennials are tech savvy, but Gen Z are tech innate, born into a tech world. Millennials had a radical transparency when they were operating online. Gen Z judiciously share. Millennials were slacktivists when it came to activism. I mean, maybe that's a bit harsh, but certainly were nowhere near as engaged as Gen Z, or inherent activists at their core. Millennials communicated in text. Gen Z communicate in image. For millennials, we had identity and tribes, and for Gen Z as a fluidity and a non-binary. Millennials were idealistic optimists, and Gen Z are optimistic realists. Now, I brought a video because I think it's always incredibly powerful to hear from Gen Z themselves, and we did interview.
If I could describe my generation in a single phrase, I think it would be experimental.
I would say queer, make it warm,
Colorful.
Complex.
I'm still trying to figure it out. Kind of in the middle right now.
Personally, I identify as a queer Black woman. All those labels are very important labels to me, right? Those labels do not determine my persona.
With regards to me being transgender, I'm in a place now where I'm out, I'm happy, I'm into my transition.
عكسي مش بشوف الليبلز دي اللي هو ماشي بعيشها بس عمري ما بفكر فيها ككاتيجوريز او كتفرقه فاهمه قصدي؟
If I could describe my generation in a single phrase, I think I would say
Determined.
Like radical.
goody,
We're expressive. Here, look.
Maybe passionate could be a word.
Invigorated.
I think I'm driven by what I want. I want justice, I want miracles, I want transformation, and I want it right now.
I think I just grew up hearing a lot of rhetoric that I knew that I disagreed with, and I had to get really comfortable with really backing up my beliefs.
Yo creo que mi generación podría cambiar el futuro del mundo. O sea, muchos pueden hablar por redes sociales que, ay, sí planto un árbol, pero si tú no lo haces, no sirve de nada, yo creo.
I think that my generation is
Empowered. Veranderlijk.
Optimistic.
Ready.
Ready.
As my generation is entering the workforce, hopefully it's going to put pressure on companies and organizations to really think about, who are we as an institution? What are our values? What are we doing to affect, people in our communities, people beyond our communities? Are we affecting them positively and are we affecting them negatively?
our generation, we're really at a point where we have a lot of the tools to create change. We recognize the burdens that we have on our shoulders, and I think we're ready to embark on that and change that.
بس نحن مع اولاد هلا، نحن كبرنا، نحن نتخرج جامعه، حنبلش نشتغل، حنكمل الشغل اللي الجيل اللي قبلنا كان حيبلشه، بس حنهتم.
I think people are over older generations telling us that we aren't allowed to do certain things or whatever. Like, millennials and Gen Z, like, we're weird. We're weird people. And I think that that's beautiful and awesome and cool.
So I'm going to talk about 4 core mindset shifts and principles for relevance, so a guide to giving meaning, especially in a theatrical space. So let's talk about 4 Gen Z core beliefs. So identity is not static or binary. Well-being is rooted in connection and community. Creativity, not currency, fuels their drive, and justice is fundamental. So a Gen Z core belief when it comes to identity, fluidity is not a fad. At Vice Media Group, we've talked about how Gen Z don't exist on a binary anymore. You're not necessarily male and female, you don't want to be boxed by labels, you're allowed to have a spectrality of representation in identity. Gen Z aren't defined by what they are anymore, which is a typical kind of marketer's approach, so age, gender, sexuality. They're defined by who they are, their values, their moral codes, their personalities, their family, their hobbies and passion. So when you're looking to resonate with Gen Z anymore, you have to think about how you align with those values, how you align with those moral codes, how you become part of their identity constructs and create a much deeper meaning. And it goes even further than that. In the recent Vice Guide to Culture, we talk about identity not only as spectrality, not being in the binary, being male, female, or this and that, and being boxed into a singular identity construct. We talk about it as pluralized. So this to me is really interesting, and I think it's useful to think about this in representation to yourself, right? Me, Amy Davis, I have an identity. I've always thought about that identity as somewhat static. I have certain characteristics of my identity that may travel across different worlds. So I might take my identity, into Instagram. I might take my identity into Facebook. I might take my identity into LinkedIn. But I still consider it somewhat static, somewhat linear, but it's just not so for younger generations. We've seen them hopping in and out of identity constructs, representing themselves differently at different times and being entirely comfortable with that. So for example, a young band in Bangkok, all-female rock band, they're going to say, I'm a fashion buyer, I'm a musician, I'm an event organizer, I'm a body painter, I'm a DJ, I'm a jewelry designer, and all those things. They're going to hop in and out of subcultures, whether it's, mermaiding or, book talk or whatever it might be. They're going to be comfortable doing that. We've seen TikTok challenges. Part of me wants to be here. I want to be suited and booted. I want to be ready to go out on the town. It is entirely acceptable to move between identities across the course of your life, across different platforms. You do not have to be static. And then, of course, these new worlds, these new digital platforms are allowing for more constructs of self, not even tethered to necessarily human constructs, right? When you're going into, we did a huge exploration of the metaverse, of gaming. When you're going into these spaces and places, you can choose to keep certain human characteristics. You can also shed them. You can be a fairy, a warlock, a cyborg. You can be whatever you choose in these environments. And I think, Amber J. Sluton from The Fabricant, one of the leading organizations in digital fashion, had a really lovely quote, which I like to say when you think about this. Can you be a body that is not yours? Can you be an ethnicity that's not yours? How far will you take your identity in future? And for Gen Z, identity is going to leave simplicity behind, right? 71% of our Gen Z audience said, our identities are going to be even more complex in future. And of course they are, because there's even more worlds opening up for this representation. So we like to put forward provocations for ourselves at Vice when we think about these kind of cultural shifts and these, new mindsets among young generations. So I've put some out, to this room. So 3 principles for relevance. Allow space for self-exploration, right? A lot of the clients that we work with, they are still trying to put young generations in a binary, in a box, and dictate labels. So, what is the theatre's role in giving space for self-exploration? How do you remain free of labels? What does a space look like that embraces reinvention and mirrors this always in beta approach of Gen Z? Well-being for Gen Z is rooted in connection and belonging. We came out of COVID, we had a huge mental health challenge worldwide, and for Gen Z, emotional health is the core focus. And we talked about that earlier when we looked at some of these cultural shifts, right? You're allowed to be open with your feelings, you're allowed to be open with your mental health needs and challenges. So, what is the priority when it comes to health for Gen Z? One, emotional well-being, then medical health, and then physical health. So this idea of supporting themselves emotionally is absolutely paramount. And part of that emotional well-being for Gen Z is human connection. This is self-care, right? They're looking for connection, for a sense of belonging, whether that's IRL or whether it's digitally. 81% of our Gen Z audience said, you know, what makes an experience fun is the opportunity to share that moment with others. You can see that's higher than millennials. You know, 67% said the events I choose to go to are going to be safe spaces for myself and others to actually be ourselves. So even in these environments, whether it's the theatre, whether it's online, whether it's IRL, they are seeking community and belonging for their own well-being. 87% of our Gen Z said they wish they spent more time in their community, and 60% said because of that we're going to gravitate to more intimate, smaller events where they can get that sense of belonging. We also did a study looking at entertainment experiences, you know, whether that was cinema, theatre, etc. The experiences also need to deliver on this need for belonging. You know, if you look back at the way we participated in events, you know, years ago, it was a much more passive experience. We weren't necessarily engaged in a more intrinsic, deeper way. And you can see that, you know, Christina Lyons, who's the program chair of FIT, said hosts, docent, actors, and facilitators at an event are crucial now. They are expected in experiences. They need to offer the personalized and memorable experiences that audiences crave. Andre Pinard, Director of Communities, Mindset and Culture at Adidas, said, you know, you get to not only experience the event, but you get the feeling of belonging to a group. This notion of belonging is huge for the future of experiences. So some considerations. How do you build that sense of belonging that exists within the four walls and beyond? You know, what opportunities are going to exist to offer personal interactions with event hosts, with facilitators, with actors, etc., creating a much more intimate sense of community? What does a space that's actually designed around connection look like, right? That could be different modules, split differently, different spaces and places conducive to different ways to bond. And there's all different facets of community. It's not just values that you share, it's artifacts that you share, it's shared language that exists between you all. You know, you only have to go to a Reddit to kind of see these boards of shared language and how you need to understand the lingo to be part of that community. So all these elements need to be thought through when creating a space and place for Gen Z. Gen Z core belief. Creativity is power. I was really interested listening to your talk, you know, looking at that suggested, you know, Gen Z need to participate and be part of culture, because that is absolutely true. And they are participating in being part of culture on a daily basis, right? Technology, of course, democratized and spread creativity. So it was technology that allowed Gen Z to do this daily. They're memifying their lives that we talked about earlier, sharing GIFs, TikTok videos, etc. They are part and parcel of the cultural exchange every day of their lives. But what people sometimes misunderstand is that creative expression is not just something they do, it's actually who they are. When we looked at previous generations, if you asked, you know, what is creativity, it would be considered a skill that certain people were able to own, but that is just not so for Gen Z. Creativity is seen as inherent and intrinsic to all of them. How would you describe most people your age? One, creative, followed by open-minded, funny, competitive, independent. And they're designing for creativity. It's not just something that they see as fundamental to themselves that they want to express, but they look for creativity in the partners that they work with, right? The number one need for Gen Z when choosing business partners is their vision and ability to innovate now. When they look at their own businesses, the culture of their business must be rooted in creativity. It's paramount. And 1 in 3 of our young people said the culture of their business must be rooted in bringing ideas to life. for Gen Z is this creativity and this idea of new experiences that is enabling them to thrive. As a Gen Z female said to us, we can express ourselves and be able to explore ourselves further in producing something or tapping in our creativity and innovation to contribute to society. You know, and 66% of our audience said, we're going to keep our resolutions to find more creativity, to find more newness in our lives. They want to learn new things and skills, try new experiences, focus more on their passions and hobbies, tap into this creativity more. And that parlays into entertainment experiences. You must give power to this creative energy, right? 50% of our audience said, for entertainment for me rather, must inspire. For entertainment to be worth our time, and again, as we talked about earlier, there is a multitude of choice out there, and it's very hard to get the attention of Gen Z. It must inspire us to create, inspire us to go somewhere, give us the unexpected. This is a very big code of conduct that we think about at Vice Media Group on a daily basis. How are we, or how can we become a conduit to that creative energy that all Gen Z possess and want to use? And they're using it for social good as well, right? We saw, again, during the pandemic, that we had a lot of activism online, globally using their creativity to fight back. You know, K-pop kind of knocking down the Trump administration. We had, the yellow duck symbols fighting the Thai monarchy. Creativity is a tool in salvation as well. So some considerations for you. How can you become a conduit to creativity to Gen Z through content, tools, and processes? It's not enough to just watch the creativity. They need to participate in creating, making, and being part of that creative exchange. What does the theatre become if it's a space to explore what-ifs? How do you create a safe space that delivers on permission to experiment and permission to fail, of course? And the last one I'll talk about, and I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anyone, I know you've been having conversations specifically in the climate space, is that Gen Z believe in collective good. For Gen Z, justice is fundamental, activism is core to who they are. And it's a way of life for Gen Z, it's not a label. They don't have to be labeled an activist, right? 61% of our Gen Z audience said, I care about social justice issues, but I wouldn't use the term activist to describe me. You know, 94% of our audience said, of those who define themselves as non-activists, they still participate in activism. Activism to me is any time a person takes an active role in advocating for the issues they care about without a goal of personal gain. It is a spectrum of things that can range from simply starting discussions with the people around you, running a non-profit group, protesting, raising money, etc. And they recognize their power to create change, and they're going to fight for it. So 80% said, you know, we'll join organizations that fight for issues. As an organization, whether you're a publisher, whether you're creating a theatrical space, whether you're a brand, you must be part of championing the social causes and issues that they care about. But you must have an authentic right to play in that space, of course. 79% of our Gen Z audience said we're going to attend protests and rallies. Only 48% Gen Y. 70% said, you know, we're going to use social media to voice our concerns and impact change. 49% Gen Y. So the issues for our audience that inspire them to take action. Racial equality, climate change, of course, is top of the agenda. Economic inequality, healthcare, gender inequality, criminal justice reform, LGBT rights, immigration reform, workplace equality, higher education, drug policy, media accountability, and consumer loans. And they're going to continue to care with more intensity. You know, I don't have it up here, but frankly, Gen Z are more empathetic as a generation. They have more empathy for others, and they have more willingness to listen to concerns of others. And 80% of our Gen Z audience said, you know, we want to participate in more activism. We want to get more actively involved. So some big considerations. how do you enable them to be those change agents, right? 7 in 10 believe positive change is going to come from them, from the people or citizens. So as organizations, we need to hand over control to Gen Z and give them the power to actually make that change. So some thoughts for you guys. How do you become, this is a different side, how do you become an ally? How do you actually support them as they want to champion and fight for those changes? How do you, where do you have a right to fight? You know, what stance can you take that is going to be authentic for this organization? And remember, it's their world. We just live in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quite a lot of interesting topics and questions. I'm thinking of where to start with. Can you just for the start a little bit more describe what your organization, the Vice Media, what you actually do?
Yeah, so Vice Media Group is a youth publisher. So we have all different youth platforms. So we have Vice, we have Refinery 29, which is female focus, we have ID, which is our fashion vertical, we have Motherboard, which is our tech vertical. But the primary audience that we're talking to is Gen Z and millennials. Vice Insights is the internal consumer and cultural research agency that feeds intelligence to each line of business. So, and works with partners to actually give them intel on Gen Z as well. I know you guys used, some of our work when looking at this project as well. So I could be doing anything from supporting our programming team to understand what nostalgia means in young lives and whether nostalgia needs to be a core theme of our programming schedule, to looking at, what's the need of Gen Z when it comes to the metaverse, when it comes to these new spaces and places where they're ultimately hanging out for the majority of their lives.
Okay, thank you. For me, it was very interesting the last part when you were talking, because I'm thinking of, and from all our meetings we already have is that we were talking about the needs and the language and everything concerning the Gen Z among people from other generations, as you said at the beginning, that we are all here from the millennials or maybe Generation X as well. I'm thinking of the problem of understanding each other, of understanding the older generations, the needs of the younger ones, and I think that's a very complicated thing.
Do you want a study on men aged 35 to 45 again? Sorry, I didn't mean to break the track.
No.
Go ahead.
Do you think that the Gen Z or the Generation Z is different than the previous generations?
I mean, I do. I think that
me
it's
too,
different.
Me too. But then I want to ask why. Why do you think it's so different?
Well, I mean, I think it's just. I wouldn't say it's so different, but there's also obviously an evolution of values, and there's certain areas that Gen Z have taken a stance on and are far more proactive within. And as I said, everyone's a product of their context, right? And as Gen Z change, so does culture. And for Gen Z, we just saw activism is front and center, but they are the change. They are actively doing. They don't think it's enough to sit on the sidelines. They're willing to get involved and take ownership of our future into their own hands. And I think we all owe them a duty of care, if they're willing to do that, to support them in that, in that initiative as well.
Okay, so question from the audience, Bara.
I have a question. I've read your studies and I've heard a lot of the research that was presented. What I was thinking now that you said that there is an evolution of values, I wonder, because I don't think there is such a big evolution of values. It's just there is evolution of how Gen Zs can actually take these values and express them and use them actively in public. So I would say that the values are not changing that much among maybe Gen Z and millennials, but it's just a different context that they live in my point of view. And if that assumption that I have is correct, why is it so difficult to approach Gen Z for the previous generation, to bring them to where we want them to have them? For instance, we want them to come to theater and participate and be here. And if we have the values that are not that, that different, why still there is, we feel that there is difficulties?
I mean, that's a tough question. I think number one is, yes, absolutely, the shared values must be there, but it's not enough to just say you're sharing in those values. You have to be demonstrably demonstrating that you're putting those values into tangible action. There's often a disconnect that we see when we're working with companies that may say, let's say whatever, it could be body positivity. Yes, we believe in body positivity, but when you actually look at how that value manifests within that organization, there's nothing tangible there other than the words. So I think there is one gap in words to action when it comes to values, and you have to have action to show. Two, I think communication, right? You have to be able to communicate with Gen Z on the platforms and channels where they're operating, in the voice and language that resonates with them. And tonally, there is a difference between talking to Gen Z and, I'm not an editor, I'm not a writer, but certainly our team are, and we have an entire team who are Gen Z themselves, by the way. That's another thing, right? You want to reach Gen Z, also think about how your complement internally is. Have you got Gen Z within the team? Because you need them, who also speak the language, understand the platforms, will help communicate in that style and tone that is going to land with the audience. So values gap to action, communication would be two areas I can think would be lacking. And then just, as a space, it's good programming, good entertainment. I mean, there's so much choice out there that it needs to be landing within some of those areas that I talked about, earlier culturally. It needs to have thematics that talk to them. It needs to be able to draw their attention when there is so much choice out there.
Okay, there was another question over there.
Thanks a lot. I'd like to ask one thing. In our context, like here in the Czech Republic, I don't know the context of USA or Canada, but as much as you described Gen Z people, I believe that the majority of Gen Z people are like this. And I live in a bubble where like the Gen Z people I meet are like this. But I still think there is a lot of people within this generation that kind of they are not like, they behave not like in the statements you made. You can see them, for example, making racist comments on Instagram. You can see them like laughing at LGBTQ people and things like this. Would you believe that there is somehow a self-regulation within the Gen Z, within this generation, that if they are able, because I think I think that they are able to like be like criticize each other. Do you think that this is true, or I don't know? Yeah, how to put it in words?
Do I think that self-regulation exists?
Yeah, kind of, because I think that like millennials like fail in this kind of, and I would like to hope that like the Gen Z people are like more active in this as well.
I mean, first of all, I agree with your point. Of course, like this is the you know, the front end of the wedge. This is where Gen Z is heading. There's always going to be a section of, you know, a huge generation that is not representative of where, in general, Gen Z is heading and pulling society. But I mean, I still think this is absolutely where Gen Z is heading and pulling society with them and pulling our culture. Do they self-regulate? I mean, from what I have seen and witnessed, yes. I think there is an expectation of, and that comes from the increased empathy that I talked about. There is an expectation that people will uphold appropriate codes of conduct as they see forth, because in general there is a far more empathetic built and yield to that generation. So, yes.
Maybe one more question, like, who is this task for? Like, is this a task for the Gen Z itself, or like, is it like our task to educate them, or like, what would you think?
Ooh, is this our task to educate, or is it their task to educate them? Both. I mean, you know, I think equally we're all responsible, right, for where we see, you know, the hope of the future. I think they've taken responsibility on themselves, which is fantastic. They've taken a participatory role. But yeah, we too, as curators, and I was a former curator in Canada, also need to be offering education and growth. And that is a huge part. You know, I talked about the creativity. A huge part of Gen Z's desires is for constant learning, is for growth, is for evolution. So they're going to look for that in partners anyway, or they're not going to stick with you.
Okay.
Sorry, I ask again. But if I think about what you two just said, I think that what's important is that you have to build a trust of Gen Zs that we want to let them take active roles. We want to help them with education or whatever. And I find it sometimes very difficult to raise the trust. Is there any, or because if you look into what you know about them, and if you put it in the context of a cultural institution, do you find something like a tool or like a trick or tip how to build a trust? In if you think that we have the opportunity to do it through the culture and through the theater, for instance.
Yeah. We did do a huge study on trust. Actually, we looked at, because as a publisher, we need to build trust too, and what we found was trust was built from actively participating within and contributing to culture yourself as an organization. I know that sounds lofty, doesn't it? But you know, what are you doing on a daily basis to be part of that fabric that they care so much about and participate in? So how are you helping champion cultural change? How are you actively participating in these different areas of culture that they value? You know, music, theatre, arts, performance. It's also been consistent, right? It's being consistent in your activities, and trust is won over time. It's not going to be instantaneous. It would be foolish to think it is, but once you're actively participating and able to remain consistent with what you're doing, then, you know, I do believe over time you will win that trust from a Gen Z audience.
And do you think, maybe it's a controversial question, but do you think they're interested in a culture or arts that we do, our generation, or just if they don't participate in it?
I don't think I know the art. I haven't done enough work on, you know, the specific differences. I'd be having a guess if I answered that, because I'd have to look at what you mean by the cultural arts that we do. How does that frame in their lives? So I don't think I know enough to give you a really reasoned answer.
But yeah, that's what I was trying to mention in the beginning, that I'm still missing in this in this concept of those 4 conferences to speak with them, with the Gen Zs, about what they like. We had a few members here or speakers, but still older people are talking about how to create a cultural institution for a Gen Z generation. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, if I can say, that's the problem. That's how to, for instance, how to build a trust, how to bring them in here. We really approach young people and we try to invite them for these discussions, and we really not totally fail, but we fail to get them in and to make them participate here with us. So, yeah, that's actually what Petra said. It's like
that's interesting. What do you think made them unwilling to, participate and be part of it? Did they see an opportunity to be collaborative long term? I would have thought they would be,
That's, for instance, the time. That's what I said at the beginning. That when we are talking to this generation, they are pretty often talking about that they get a lot of school and then they get a lot of works to do after the school, for the school, and then they have to get a lot of hobbies, to go to piano lessons and go for, I don't know, something like this. So the first thing is this. The second one is that if we want to attract, and it was the big task to invite the people from the theaters and the Pragues or Czech culture area to speak about that we need to do it during the day, because nearly all of us are working in the theaters and somewhere in the cultural institution, and our focus time is during the evening. So the time when we can talk and to know something about new is during the day, and they are in school. That it is, and this is one point. And what I said before, they don't have a time. So to attract them, just to invite them to speak, it's not somehow interesting for them. We need to attract them, to invite them for something more, I don't know. They are talking quite often about that they need fun. They need to be happy about something, and that's it. This is not about happiness.
I see. But yeah, I mean, I think beyond giving them a role beyond speaking and giving them an opportunity to really contribute and maybe even get value back, right? For example, we did a Gen Z consultancy board that we ran for 2 years, where they participated in helping us understand identity, helping us understand sustainability. And as part of that contribution, we exposed their writing across the ecosystem. There was a value exchange for them in that participation. They got to showcase their writing. They got to meet with different internal people across the organization. So they got learning from different mentors. Mentorship was a huge part of it. So I think, building program design for Gen Z that delivers on some of these pieces that they so want, which is that opportunity to express creativity, that opportunity for growth, would bring them in and foster a long-term collaboration with them beyond, just jumping on a stage.
Yeah, and it's true. When we, as I said at the beginning, when we organized the conference about the climate changes and about ecologism activism through the art, we got there much more people from this generation. So maybe they don't like to speak about them, but they want, as you said in your presentation, they want to be active. Yeah.
And as I said, I've obviously, I scratched the surface for the purpose of this session, but all of these 4 areas have a depth of thought behind them, which I'm always happy to share. We have a trust study which looked at really how to build trust and how to actively do that, which goes into a lot more detail. We have the study on the metaverse, which looks at these digital communities and how belonging is manifesting within them. But for the purpose of this talk, I can't go into each and every one, but I'm happy to share, because I think it would be valuable.
Okay, share.
Yeah, I just want to give an example. Over the last 5 years, besides running NIE, I've been building a venue in Oslo, a national venue for young audiences. And since we've been building it from nothing, we've really tried to open up in the programming. It's a programming stage. Been trying to open up for a huge representation. So everyone who normally don't come to the theater can come and try out their art in the space. And then of course we've attracted a lot of different groups and have had the possibility to speak a lot with this generation. And just now, after 5 years, we see that it starts to spill over. So people that would come only to the cosplay thing also might come to see Theatre Drac next week in the same theatre. But this has taken a long time. And it's also important that they feel that they have their own spaces inside the building and that it is a safe space. And yeah.
Do you think that spillover came just from proximity, or because you created a community sense with different mechanisms?
It's still too early. I don't know really, but I think for some people it's become like a third place, something between school and home, and they stop by there to check out what's going on, and they've had good experiences with which represent them, especially for migrant people in Norway. I mean, they very often don't come to the theatre at all because it's not about them. It's mainly in Norway. It's mainly about white middle class, and that's the way it is. And then they had experiences where actually their stories or people from their community get on stage and say something about their situation. And of course, that's very empowering.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of the third space, right, versus the theatrical barrier, but thinking of it in a third space and creating more around that. Yeah, it's very smart. Thanks for sharing.
And can I have a question? Yeah, I think you mentioned it in the presentation. How important is the appearance of the physical space, for example? Is it important how this, for example, this theater looks?
Yeah. How it looks? I thought you were going to say in comparison to digital spaces.
In building the trust, and maybe if they want to force them or ask them to come, maybe if you're building a new venue somewhere, how important is to create a safe space for them, or a place they like, they feel good?
I mean, the word safe space I think is incredibly important. It's absolutely crucial to build a space where they feel that they can be free to express themselves in whatever manner that they choose, because that expression is showing up differently. And to have a space that offers different elements, so it's not just a theatrical sit-back experience, as we all know, we just talked about it. Design and aesthetic, I mean, who doesn't love, attractive design and aesthetic? But again, I don't have a proof point for that. I just, I'm sure that having visuals which resonate is going to appeal, but might not appeal to others, so then you're alienating a certain section.
Okay, so time's up, more or less. So
thank you
very
much.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.